Welcome back to Khali Yoga Center. I'm Ian and I'm working with Chris today for a pose breakdown on Ragdoll, Uttanasana. So let's begin in Ragdoll. So Chris is basically just in a forward fold. That's a simple way of looking at the pose here. And then specifically working with the alignment of the pose, Chris's feet are placed hips distance apart, and he's got his feet both facing 12 o'clock. So the big toes are pointing forward, the inner ankles are turned back. So then working up into the legs, Chris has a soft bend in his knees, which allows for flow of energy through the joints. And then working up into his hips are stacked over his heels, so he's got this architecture of the pose, stacked heels and hips. And then he's got a gentle tilt upward in the pelvis here. And then through the spine line, he's got this releasing energy dropping straight down through the crown of the head, releasing toward the earth. And he's holding opposite elbows here, which is the traditional way of doing Ragdoll, the classic Ragdoll pose. And now working with the action in the pose, we'll again begin down at the foundation. So Chris has a strong press anchoring down through the ball mounds of the big toes, and then his other toes are spreading out on the mat, giving this wide anchored foundation. And then from that rooting in the ball mounds, then the inner ankles are turned back, and there's a lift in the arches of the feet. And he's got a strong press down through the center of each heel, from which he can also lift up. And then his leg muscles are hugging into the bones, creating this powerful contraction of energy in the legs, again, creating a strong foundation. And the spiraling of his inner thighs going back mirrors that same turning back of the inner ankles down in the feet. And then up in the hips, there's a rotation upward in the pelvis. So he's got this upward tilt, which makes a nice long lower back. And then the releasing energy in the upper body is possible because he's created this strong rooted foundation and powerful pillars in his legs. So then it allows this counterbalance and counter energy of the upper body completely surrendering down. Now, a few common misalignments that show up in the pose often begin down at the foundation. So a lot of times people's feet placement-wise, they'll have their feet super close together, all the way together. And then that brings the feet in closer than the hips are, which kind of takes out that stacking of the joints. So to correct for this, it's real simple. You just bring the feet apart a bit, at least hips width distance apart. You may choose to go wider with your feet, which gives a little bit more stable foundation for some bodies. And then another common misalignment is the angle of the feet. So sometimes folks will have their toes turned inward a lot, like a pigeon-toed stance, which kind of knocks the knees together. Also, folks will have kind of a turned out stance with their feet. So the toes are pointing out wider than the ankles, which doesn't align the legs for that inward spiral of the inner thighs. So we're just looking for the feet pointing straight forward, the outer edges of the feet parallel to the outer edges of the mat. Now, another common misalignment happens in the joints here, especially in the knees. So often folks will lock out their legs here. Yeah, and you can see that kind of domes the upper back. It rocks his hips back farther away from his heels. So to create some more softness in the joints, he's just going to bring a little bend to the backs of his knees. And it can be a deep bend. For some folks, that makes the pose more accessible, a deep bend in the knees. But even just the slightest softness in the joints takes out that tension created when like the bones are carrying the weight of the pose, versus when his knees are a bit soft, he can engage the muscles of his legs and have more support around the structure of the joint versus the bones carrying the stress of the pose. And then in the upper body, often folks have a tendency to lift their head up here, and they're so like gazing out in front, creating unnecessary tension in the neck and overextension in the front of the throat. So he can just drop his head down. Super simple. This releasing of the muscles in the neck allows the head to drop straight down to the ground. And then his shoulders can also relax a bit more without that added tension in the upper body. Now, one place this pose can be modified that can really help some folks, especially if hamstrings are super tight or if folding this far forward isn't possible in the body, is just to use some blocks. So if I bring these blocks under Chris's hands, he can use the blocks to help support some of the weight of his upper body, which can take some of the stress and stretch out of the legs and give the upper body some more release. So then he can still drop his head down and have this softening of the upper body, still accessing that strong foundation in the lower body with some support of the hands on blocks. Thanks for joining us here at Khali Yoga Center. Thank you, Chris.
Yes, sir.
And don't forget to check out our other videos. We've got a lot of pose breakdowns that'll help you explore your practice and find different ways to express the different poses.